On behalf of the AFCEA Technical Committee and the organizational team for this event, it's my pleasure today to introduce a colleague of mine from Carnegie Mellon's University Software Engineering Institute. Bobbie Stempfley is accomplished so much in her life that I talked with her before, and I would take up all her time if I talked about all the things that she's done, and she's won several awards. So I encourage you to read about her bio and the many things that she's done. The thing that I think you'll find, and I find every day, because I'm just 2 doors down from her, is that she's an individual that has a genuine smile, a beautiful smile, by the way, but she's willing to help. And in this area of cybersecurity and the environment that we're in, it's just great to have someone that contributes back to our wonderful field. So it's my pleasure then, and let's give her a warm welcome to welcome Bobbie Stempfley.
So Ken's right, we are office mates of sorts. I think there's one office between us, so we have the pleasure of seeing each other a great deal. And when I told my kids I was coming to do this today, they said, okay, Mom, just make sure you don't trip going up the stairs. So for any of you who see my children later in the day, which is possible, at least one of them might be on campus, let them know I did not trip going up the stairs. It's never a guarantee. So thank you all for coming today. It's been a little bit of a dreary couple of weeks here in Northern Virginia, and it's nice to have a little bit of a break from that and come here and talk about key issues facing us today and in the future. And I appreciate the fact that we're doing this on a college campus. I work at a college campus doing applied research. So we get, I say I get the best of both worlds. I get real problems, real data, and real science all mixed together. But I think it's really apropos that we're here talking about C4ISR concerns today and in the future, because we spend a lot of time looking too close to our nose and really trying to focus on what's right in front of us and never digging ourselves out of the problem. And so looking at this a little bit further out by being engaged at an academic organization and by partnering effectively across industry, academia, and government, I think is the only way we solve these problems. And so I'm especially gratified to have the opportunity to talk to you today. As Ken said, my name is Bobbie Stempfley. I have many decades in information technology, in computing, and in computer security related activities, both inside government and out, and really have had the privilege of being on the leading edge and bleeding edge of organizational transformation and technology transformations that have affected warfighting, affected business, affected effectively our way of life. And so I thought a lot about what to say today, right? What are the innovations in technology that we need to talk about? What's the big issue that that I think we need to talk about? And I started with this thinking it's really not a different issue. It's in large part the same one. It's that operational tempo we're all struggling with, right? Innovations in technology, driving changes in business processes, demands of our consumers, demands of our users. The fact that there's always an operation around the clock, right? You talk to military commanders today and they say, yes, training is incredibly important, particularly in the cyber dimension. Training is incredibly important. It's incredibly important. How do I step away from being engaged every minute of the day with the adversary in order to train, right? So that ops tempo is huge. And those adversaries adapt, right? So how do we think about that agility that we need? So what could I add to the conversation? It'll be 30 years since the Morris worm, 31 in November. I would like to say I'm old enough to remember what that meant to us as an industry. I am old enough to remember what that meant to us as an industry, unfortunately. But 31 years ago, we realized the strategic asset that connectivity, computing, and software provided. We might not have really come to grips with it, but 30 years ago, the world changed. 21 years ago, eligible receiver happened, right? First, no holds barred exercise on a live network. And that transformed a large part of how the Defense Department is organized. 20 years ago, since Moonlight Maze. And I could go on and on and on with the list of things that have happened over the last 20 years up to yesterday. So how have things changed? How have they stayed the same? What do we need to focus on? And one of the things that we knew then, and that has stayed the same, is that situational awareness is key. And I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about analytics and the use of analytics to create situational awareness, the positives and the negatives that are here. Because knowing what's happening in this incredibly complex environment is important for us to use it, to defend it for its resiliency. And on the positive, never before have we had the tools that we have today. I remember counting computers, right? Was okay, it'll get offloaded onto a dock. I'll put a sticker on it. I'll barcode, right? I'll read that barcode. I now know how many computers I have. That's not the world we live in today, right? But never before have we had the tools to understand the environments we're in. It really is a good news, bad news story, isn't it? The good news is we have virtual mountains of data at our disposal to gain this awareness. Mountains of data. The bad news is we have virtual mountains of data to sift through, to make sense of, in order to gain greater awareness. So, is there good news in that? I think so, right? There's really good news in that the science has evolved, and there are now methods for sifting and understanding this data. And as those methods are improving, the promise is greater. So back to history, we've made great strides in the last 20 years, sensing technologies which were really sparse in this environment, right? I remember the early days of intrusion detection, the early days of net flow analysis, the early days of understanding what was going on. They're now everywhere, right? The awareness could not be better. Network connectivity, which was once a privilege, is now pervasive. Our ability to do sense-making, which was once the purview of only talented analysts, is now largely pre-processed by automation and delivered. Since that time, we've added exponentially to our volume of data, and that volume is continuing to increase with the proliferation of endpoints, with sensors, with virtualization. And so the difficult task once described of as finding a needle in a haystack is rather finding the right needle in a stack of needles is becoming more difficult. The nature and fabric of computing is changing too. There was a day when processors and storage were optimized for gaming. Right? That was a real watershed moment for the Defense Department when it became clear that computing and storage was built for gamers. Today, we're seeing it being optimized for artificial intelligence, for neural networks, chipsets being specialized, not being commoditized. These hardware transformations are a part of the long march to the cloud, and they mean the term fabric is really accurate. The ubiquity of computing, specialized and commodity, with processing at higher speeds, is woven into everything. You know this if you have a teenager, right? The minute they think that they might have to be without their phone, their computer, their connectivity. Right? This makes the environment simultaneously more brittle and more resilient. Right? We are in a world of ironies because the data keeps coming. This is another one of those ironies. The more data we create more data just in the act of processing and using the data we have. And so we continue to be buried under this virtual mountains of data. So this flow of data holds the promise of helping us understand where we are in the world, of helping us improve our situational awareness. And our challenge that we're facing, and one of the things you heard from GMU is this focus on analytics. It's knowing how to analyze those terabytes of data, how to turn it into something meaningful that humans can understand at scale and at speed. So science is helping. I work in an organization that's really focused on putting science behind so much of the cyber activity that's going on today. And I think our community is really taking advantage of these advances. How we find these insights more rapidly in this pool of data, how we leverage data science in order to do this, how we put the machines to work to do the things they do best that depend on that data, tap into that power through the use of machine learning. And most importantly, how we put humans in the best place for humans to be and computing in the best place for automation and computing to be, and leveraging the strengths of each. And that sounds pretty straightforward. It means, though, we really need to understand how to put this puzzle together. There are nuances that we've never explored before because we have data from a variety of sources collected from different contexts telling us different stories, and we need to put it together into something meaningful, into a mosaic. We need to understand cognition and perception in order to do that. So I want to start with data science. We'll work through each of these a little bit. If you don't know the definition, it is basically using data to understand and analyze actual phenomena. It's the purview of mathematicians and statisticians. It's easy to jump right in and talk about artificial intelligence. Everybody makes that leap. But today, I want to start a bit before that, right? Today, I want to think about all of that data we have to work with and how we process it while we're simultaneously expanding the sources and quantity every day, actually every minute. If you think about quantifying grains of sand on a beach, Google provides a public statistic. The pages and pages of responses they provide to 40,000 search queries they get every second. Every second. And so if you look at the agenda today, you're going to hear more and more about this. You're going to hear examples of artificial intelligence and how to use it. You're going to hear about the use of data in resilient communities. These vast amounts of data that are available must be understood, normalized, and analytics built around it. Data scientists remind us that it's not just as easy as letting the computers do it. We must ensure that this is done in an unbiased way, that we aren't reflecting the worst examples of our decision-making in the computer. Else we'd be more than just an embarrassing story on the news. The former director of the National Security Agency, Mike Rogers, made an interesting comment, which leads us into the idea of machine learning. He says, we have to make this easy for our citizens, for the private sector, and for us to interact with each other. We must be able to share information in real time in a machine-to-machine way. We must recognize the speed and complexity of the challenges we're talking about in cyber. Yet another irony. We have to slow down a little bit in order to speed up. We have to stop and think in order to execute in an effective and viable way. So how do we put machines to work on all of this data? We need more than where we are today. We need more than automation and orchestration. We need more than just taking the rote and executing it faster. Speed is incredibly important, and speed is a key element to agility, but it is not enough. We need that agility. We need adaptation. And we need computing to help us with that adaptation. Machine learning helps us with this, right? It refers to systems who can automatically improve with experience. No matter how many times you use your software to perform the same task, normally, the software doesn't get any smarter. We're in a new world. We're in a world where software is becoming not deterministic, where machine learning allows software to learn from previous observations, make inferences about future behaviors, and guess what you might want to do in new scenarios. We've all seen the snake oil, right? Buy this product, it will solve your problems. And then you get into it and it's like, yes, it will, when you teach it. So this is alive and well in the commercial world. You see it when you get the right ads when you shop. When you get people who bought this might look for that. Perhaps this is the next thing you want. We have to bring this into our mission environments that are here. It's very real in domains for cybersecurity such as insider threat, malware analysis, network analysis, and even secure coding. Another one of those ironies, the limitations in using and developing machine learning tends to be not having enough data, not having the right data. There's a song lyric, standing in a river and dying of thirst. So we really have to think about how we use existing data to create more informative data to ensure that we can employ the kinds of learning technologies that are there. So this isn't real yet, right? I'm talking about this in an esoteric. Let me give you a practical example. This is a really interesting piece of research that a set of individuals are doing to try to help overcome the shortage in reversing engineers, the shortage in folks who might do malware analysis. Visualization can help in this space. So think about the amount of malware that exists on the network. Human analysis is expensive. We don't have enough people who can look at malware and decompose it. Malware variations happen in an unpredictable way. They're highly frequent. And traditional visualization, if you've ever seen one, it looks like nodal analysis. You cluster things together. This stuff kind of might be this stuff kind of might be that. And all it really does is help people prioritize what to look at. We stepped back, cognition and perception, and said, how do humans process data? What might a different visualization be? If you've ever heard of something called Chernoff faces, it's a data set that says people view faces, they process more data about faces than they do about anything else. And so we looked at Chernoff faces and how you could identify similarities between malware files, and now processed a large number of malware files through this and presented a visualization with some short and fat faces, with some wide and some tall and narrow faces, some with big hair, some with small hair, some with big noses, small with little noses, smiles, lack of smiles. Grouped faces in a way that individuals without deep training in reversing could say, these 6 variations of malware actually are the same in these ways. They all have big hair. These 3 have a face that just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't look like a face. I need to go focus on those because they're not like any of the others. Analysts visualize these groups of faces faster, better, with more nuance, because humans cognate and perceive in that way. So we're now talking to the analysts, not talking to other machines here. They're able to do this faster than dots on a cluster diagram. So happy faces with big hair, one family. Sad faces with small hair, second family. Faces that are fairly ambiguous, not part of either family. Analyst effort is reduced. It looks goofy, but it works. So visualizations like this are important, right? Machine learning supporting those kinds of visualizations. You can reduce tens of thousands of pieces of information into a single image. You can teach individuals what to look for, saving tremendous amounts of effort. The project's called Malfaces. It's a phenomenally successful project for us and has been able to help with the manpower needs of different organizations as they go forward. It's an example of how we think about early stages of human-machine teaming, right? The accelerating pace of advances in machine learning are wonderful, but they're really heralding the end of a period where humans are responsible for everything. Humans and machines team in cyberspace in order to execute at the speed of cyber. We know this. We do this. We want this. We want implicit responses, automated responses to known things. We want automated sensing. We want turn on, turn off. We also know that in order to do this, we have to solve an incredibly important problem of trust. We have the trust problem between humans, and now we have a trust problem to solve between software and computing. Can we trust it to do the things that it is expected to do at the speed and the scale that is required? In the real world, we grant autonomy in some context, explicit or implicit. I tell my son, yes, you can go out to dinner. Yes, you may take the car. That is an explicit statement of autonomy. What I mean is, implicitly stated, yes, you may take the car. Don't do anything stupid. Be home by curfew, right? Follow the law. I didn't state any of those implicit elements when I granted him that autonomy. So how do we do this with machines? How do we handle the situation of go from here to there, tell the machine to execute this task? We mean do it if it's safe, if it's smart, if it's these other pieces. And so how do we handle this repeatable and explainable requirements? How do we get transparency out of the machine, out of artificial intelligence, so that you will understand what it's doing? Because uncertainty persists in this space. How do we get the robot to explain why it's doing what it's doing in that way? Uncertainty persists about what the robot senses, what it predicts about its state and the states of other objects around it, what it believes its outcomes will be from the actions it takes. This is the challenge in autonomy today, right? How do we do this? So we're working, another interesting project that is going on in academia is to create algorithms that translate robot actions into English consumable content. Why did the robot do that? Well, why doesn't it tell you? Why shouldn't it just tell you when you want it to as a part of what it's doing? To create algorithms to generate those explanations using translations and user preferences for the types of information they receive. I'm okay with you not telling me why you climbed that set of stairs that was in front of you. That was obvious. But I want to know why you chose this path over that one. I want to know why you handled this data in this way. And then to provide natural language explanations that are then further machine consumable to improve that trust in automation and artificial intelligence. We need to develop these methods for autonomous systems to explain their decisions so that human operators can understand, so they can choose to intervene only when required, so that the human and the machine can maximize their individual value and not question each other. I think it will be this combination going forward. We talk about humans in the loop to humans on the loop. There's always a human associated with the loop. I used to believe that machines would take over and do it all. And if you've followed the DARPA Grand Challenge year over year, and particularly at Black Hat, the Capture the Flag Challenge, a machine won. One of the Carnegie Mellon teams, actually, won the DARPA Grand Challenge, having a machine compete against other machines in the Capture the Flag. One of the really interesting things about that competition several years ago was the automation won because it focused on defense, not because it focused on offense. Interesting lesson. The other one was it was a really close game, right? Small differences in strategy made huge differences. But for me, the most important lesson was when you teamed a human against a computing machine, the humans want. It isn't about Go or chess, where there are actually an n number of consumable options. It's about the creativity and adaptation. And we aren't at a point yet where that creativity and adaptation in machine learning have evolved to work in isolation. Machines don't understand what I call the mosaic effect. They don't understand that every piece of data or set of data comes with context and how it was collected, what questions it was designed to ask or answer. Every analytic that's built provides a piece of the picture, but those analytics are only a part of the picture. They're not always generalizable. It is that balance of making something new every time you have a question and reusing something old. You have to understand that your situational awareness picture is pieced together and is contextual. And that's one of the things our adversaries understand. When you put a bunch of pieces together to build this picture, you have edges and overlaps between the pieces. Think about how you map vulnerabilities and exploits on your network. How do you show the areas of greater risk? Edges are the places where things aren't so clear. One data set could be about vulnerabilities and another about exploits. There's not a one-to-one mapping. How do you overlay these pieces together with networks and topologies in this rapidly changing fabric of computing? And blue and red force mapping. Know where the edges of each piece are and how they overlay into the bigger picture is really vital. Our mosaic has clear pieces and fuzzy pieces, and knowing which is what's important. This is one of the challenges we have to recognize in this space, that context, understanding it, representing it, describing it in the data is vital so that we can explain what's happening, so we can have confidence in it all. It is this is the space of cognition and perception. It's vital for us to understand how people who will use this mosaic will perceive it. Think back to the last time you tried to explain something so clear to you, and the individual you were talking to just wasn't seeing the same mental image. I have zero geo-directional capability. Somebody trying to give me directions, awful. I have no context. They do. It's really vital for us to understand this. So the mosaic is the warning. Remember, in this situational awareness activity, in this big picture, you have this effect happening. You can have a beautiful picture. It can produce false precision. You have to recognize where its value is and where it isn't. So I remember that this mosaic is also built across the system lifecycle. It's not just from operational users. It includes and serves program managers, operators, multi-domain operations elements, test and development communities. I think a lot about an analogy that a member of my team shared, which I want to leave as a closing thought before taking questions. In World War II, airplanes were coming back from combat with holes in the wings and in the fuselage. The idea was to figure out where the planes were getting hit the most and reinforce those areas. And now the power of thinking differently. A statistician said, there's a fatal flaw in your reasoning. You're only looking at the planes that survived. The planes that didn't come back had holes in other areas. You might want to look at that, at the places where there are no holes. I think that's our call to action today. That's our call to action going forward. How do we build this mosaic, this situational awareness? How do we think about the analytics that are behind us to support the entire community? To look at it from all the vantage points that are there. To recognize that the important elements here are about the decisions. How do people think? How do they perceive? And how do they decide? Thank you. I have time for questions.
We've got time for questions. If you would, please wait for a microphone. Just raise your hand. We've got 3 mic runners. I'll get to you in 1 second here.
And I have to warn you, you cannot see from the stage, so sort of orient me to where in the room you are.
Just raise your hand there so she spots you.
I am right in front of you.
Okay, perfect.
Hi. Thanks for coming down. Jordan Eichelbaum from AFCEA. I'm trying to take all this science and put it into real things too.
Absolutely.
One of the things I've observed is that computer scientists and programmers are really good at identifying the data flows and not so good, as you said, the context, really the data relationship. So as you start looking at threat modeling of cybersecurity, a lot of people want to get right down into the weeds and sort of miss the big picture of these relationships. Can you talk to how we might improve that threat modeling process?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I'll tell you, I'm a little bit of a community heretic on this topic. So please take that take my comments with that context. One of the challenges I see that has long existed in this space is that we are a bottom-up community. And it takes a while for a computer scientist or a cybersecurity operator or someone of that like to get the experience to understand the translation requirements that are required. We don't yet have enough top-down commander's intent kind of individuals who can speak in a way that is translatable between the two communities, and that has limited us in many instances here. We spend a lot of time talking about IP addresses and APT actors, and get really focused on the is it Cozy Bear or is it APT 26 or something of that sort. And what we really need to do is think more about what is the opportunity space in the environment that exists there. It is not an infinite set of things that adversaries can do in the environment themselves. And that's where things need to really be focused on instead of the sort of attribution element in that space. Followed with the fact that we are about to have our first round of general officers who had computers in elementary school. All right? I mean, I don't want to trivialize this, but we are about to have effectively our first round of general officers who are familiar with what it means to be connected in this way and who really recognize it. And there's a bit of a translation opportunity that's there. The third thing that needs to happen is the computer science community, the cyber community, of which I am a card-carrying proud member of, has got to get out of our own way and start realizing we have to talk to humans, and we have to be able to talk to humans in their language. And there's a meeting in the middle in that has to happen. I told you I was a heretic, though, right? So, okay.
Question straight ahead, Bobbie.
Straight ahead. Got it. Thank you.
Hi, I have a
They
question.
warned me the lights were really bright. They were right.
Oh, okay. Going to the issue of trust that you mentioned before. I've worked in computers for a while too, and I can remember many commands that you have if you use it this way, you get unexpected results. Okay, so my question has to do with unexpected consequences. I remember the Morris worm too, and I also remembered that it was a mistake.
It was.
Right, it wasn't supposed to spread that far. That was not the intended result.
So is
So
penicillin,
how-
right? Penicillin was a mistake. So many innovations have come from mistakes.
I understand, but in this context, how do you marry the problem of unexpected consequences with trust?
Yeah, I wish there were good answers to that question, right? Because we are in a non-deterministic world, and that is, in some instances, impeding how we're able to build trust, because trust comes from predictability, right? I trust you because I can predict how you will react in a particular situation. And trust is also not binary. And we have to recognize both of those things that are there. You asked me the hard question. There aren't good, positive answers here. I think we will make progress, though, as we stop thinking about trust as being binary and we start thinking about it as being a continuum. I think we also will make progress as we are more able to describe why things happen as we're going along, and I think that's sort of an important element. We are a very results-driven society. I want this outcome, and we have to also be able to describe why that outcome occurred, and those two things I think will help, particularly if we can produce that why in a machine consumable way so that we can continue to evolve that discussion. It's a little bit of a wing and a prayer in that answer, but my thoughts at the moment.
Question in the way back, Bobbie, all the way in the back.
I really appreciate your your explanation, I guess, of our current and possible future state for C4i. And the reason I'm approaching this context is some of us probably in the room, I started this in the 90s and the 80s in IT of sorts and saw the evolution of things. And I'm coming from the context of an Army Signal Corps officer, where our primary mission was to provide IT to the commander,
Right.
to the business entity. And the problem set we had those days was to just get it done. We want to get this path to execute our business mission, similar to the commercial mission today. And then eventually make it faster, more usable. And faster and usability coming out of the first Gulf War was to maybe commercialize. You know, the answer is probably out there, and they're doing it faster and more redundantly and more robustly. So get us into the commercial world. So we opened our network. And that's where the problem began, as far as we're concerned anyway. Now we've got to still provide the fastest, the more dynamic throughput for our commanders and for our business users while we protect it. So we bring the two communities together now to continue to give this hedge to IT and communications, and we need to lock it down. I heard a commercial this morning to say just lock it down. Okay, protect it. We don't make that decisions as custodial. We are not the business owners. So how do we bridge this chasm? I guess is the problem, is the issue.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, the point. There's several questions in your question, so I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit. There. The idea of how we bridge the chasm between enterprise services or central services back to mission requirements that commanders need to execute is, I think, a more easily solved problem than we are currently acknowledging. And that is that we overcome scale with bureaucracy. That's effectively how organizations overcome size and scale, by putting in processes and bureaucracy. And that reinforces tribes and silos. And those tribes and silos make it more difficult to communicate needs from one end to the other. And we've got to continue to take advantage of the kinds of teaming activities that are best practices nowadays in development, in engineering, and in engagement, so that it's not a user representative representing what's actually happening on the ground. It's more a real voice that's able to talk about those pieces. But that's not going to get us everywhere. We have to think our way through this evolving technological landscape. I think I talked a little bit about how we are suffering today from a world of commoditization and configurability. We have decided as an industry and as a community that the best answer for the consumer is to give them lots of choices. I want a computer that can do anything. It can be your newfangled typewriter, and it can play your game, and it can run your this and execute your business operations. We're actually on the other end of that pendulum, and we're going to more and more specificity and lack of configurability in a lot of these things. People are buying into ecosystems in their personal lives. Organizations are buying into specialization in chipsets and in software in order to help with that. Now, some of that's going to help because it reduces attack surfaces, it increases speed, it reduces fragility, all of the side effects. Some of that's going to hurt. It also complicates interoperability. It complicates some agility in certain manners, and we have to really come to grips with what this is going to mean for us as an industry and as a mission operator. I think that we made a mistake many years ago when we said that the cyber operators and the IT professionals were different careers and were different functions. Because in the end, the people who run the network are most often the people who are responsible for taking the actions necessary to defend it. And when we divided that thinking, we created a silo that was really less viable long term. And those things are coming back together now. The technology is helping to push those things back together.
Question dead center in the middle.
Dead center middle, thank you.
I'm very heartened by your approach of bringing humans into the equation. I think that's absolutely critical in this area. But it needs to be more than data scientists, computer scientists paying attention to behavioral, social, cognitive, human sciences.
Agreed.
For example, you mentioned trust is not binary. It's certainly not even binary. It's multidimensional and it's context dependent, depending on a variety of contexts. So how do you bring in behavioral scientists, cognitive scientists, social scientists, human scientists into the cyber team when there seems to be a very high bar to entry in terms of understanding the technology?
Yeah. There's no easy answer to this question either, right? I would say we have to start by stop calling something a hard science versus a soft science. Right? We have this bias in some regards, even at the beginning. It's science, and if we once meant hard because it dealt with things you could touch, right, like materials, and soft because it meant wetware, great, we're beyond that at this point. It's all really vital for us to think our way through. I think that barrier to entry is a false barrier. At least in my experience, it's a false barrier. We put it up because we want, because as computer scientists, we're the newest science on the block, and we want to be, we want to have some kind of acknowledgement in that space. I'm very successful bringing together people with a wide variety of backgrounds. The number one, you all know this, right? The number one challenge when you bring a team together is you've got to build a vocabulary for that team. And that's the barrier. It's not the barrier is the technology, and you don't understand the technology. The computer scientists don't understand the behavioral science either. They don't have a common vocabulary. And so we really have to start at that point. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest steps forward. The other place that becomes more complicated once you get the vocabulary is the levels of abstraction that you need to communicate at. Right? Computing can happen anywhere. Impact doesn't happen where action is always. And so really thinking about what kinds of levels of abstraction do we need to put in place in order to have that. I'm reminded of a piece of advice a former boss gave me, which I relive every day, and I want to leave with you as well. And that is to always follow what she called the Christopher Columbus rule. And is to separate what is new from what is new to you. And recognize that there's a lot of things out there, the new to you will far outnumber the new. And so make sure that as you're thinking you've found something new, you've done the work to make sure it really is not just something that's new to you. And I think that will help in that activity.
Any final questions from the back? We got mic runners on both sides. Just raise your hand. No more? Okay. Thank you, Bobbie. Please join me in thanking Bobbie for her presentation.